Hi, I'm Sherilyn from Avoca. In this lesson, I will go over the content browser. I will show you how to create your own packages, how to import assets, how to save packages, and how to copy and move between packages. So with the UDK open, if you open up the content browser, and this is where we save all of our packages, this is where we get all our assets and so forth. So earlier we did create a folder that I called Shares Avoca, and from there you can actually see the map because I'd actually created a map from earlier. So say for example now what I want to do is I want to start to create some of the fun stuff. I want to start to create materials, I want to import some textures and so forth. So what we'll do is we'll go over how to do all that from in here. First of all, what we'll do is we'll start out with a few little simple things just so you can get yourself started. There are all different types of content within here that Epic actually give you, so long as you install the version that has the content with it. If you expand the showcases one and expand the foliage, you've got a whole stack of different folders within here, or what they call packages within here. Now, if you want to see what's inside a package, it's very easy. What I'm going to do is I'm going to come to the root, which is the showcases. Now, you'll notice that it does show up everything that's within the showcases package. Now, some of these packages, well actually all of them, you'll notice that they've got this little square box here. All this means is the package hasn't been fully loaded. So there's several ways to fully load it. The reason you need to fully load it is so you can actually use that within your own package. Now, one thing to have so it's fully loaded is you can just click on this button and it fully loads it. Or the other way is if you want to fully load all the packages, you can do it in one hit. However, please be warned, if it's a large package, it could take some time. So if I wanted to fully load all this, all I do is from the showcases is I right click on showcases and click on fully load. All this does is this saves memory. And that didn't take too long. Everything is now fully loaded. So say for example, I think to myself, oh, I'd like to put in some trees into this little level here. Now there are different ways of actually doing a search for your different assets. So I'll just expand this a little bit. Here you've got all these different object types. You've got your favorites, which is standard, animation sets, material instances, time varying, materials, particle systems, skeletal meshes, sound cues, static meshes, and textures. Now say for example you wanted to just have a look at particles. Here, click on particles, and it shows up all the particles that's within all of these packages. If I want to look at skeletal meshes, I can click on skeletal meshes and we have a skeletal mesh. I can also, as you could see, select particles and skeletal meshes. If I untick, it'll go back to all. Now if there isn't something in there that you want to view, this is where all type comes into. And all type shows absolutely everything. As you can see, you can keep scrolling down. So if you don't see anything in your favorites and you want to say view archetypes, there are none in here, but you click on archetypes or apex assets. Again, nothing in here. So 9 times out of 10, you're bound to choose all. Okay, so for example, I want to start putting some trees onto this level. As we all know, everyone likes trees in levels. It makes it look pretty. You can actually do several ways of searching for this. Now you can either type in the word tree up the top here and enter. If it comes up with nothing, it means that there's nothing there with the word tree in it. But I knew that the word tree was somewhere inside these packages. This shows up everything. Now if I want to see just the static meshes, I click on static mesh, and these are all the different sort of trees or foliage within the packages that you can actually use. If I wanted to bring in this shade tree, for example, simple way of doing it. You can click and drag. And as you can see, it's very, very small. But if I come over to it, there's the tree. Another way of doing it is with it selected. Now, you can tell if something's selected because it has this little yellow highlight. I click on it, little yellow highlight. Say, for example, I want to import it a different way. I can highlight it. I can right click and I can choose Add Static Mesh. Done. Added. Now, say for example you're thinking, oh, but what if I want a whole stack of these trees? I don't want to sit there and drag them in all the time. Well, that's where the foliage editor comes into it. So the foliage editor is this little button here. Now you can put anything inside the foliage editor. So for the example, we're just going to use this tree. If I click and drag until you see it in this little area here and let go, it adds it to this area. And I can do that for as many assets as I want. This is where you've got a whole stack of settings. So you've got your density. 100 might be a little bit too much, so I'm going to set this to say 10. You've got your radius, which is the radius that you want the tree to be. So as you click and drag it, you're going to get a little bit more sporadic. I don't know, I'll just set it to 5. Align to normal, what that does is that will align it to the normal of the actual landscape or the asset that you're trying to add it to. So if you do have a landscape and you have got hills, say for example you want to align that tree to a hill, that'll actually align it to the normal of that hill. Sometimes that might look a little bit strange, but it's up to you if you want to align it to the normal. I'm just going to leave this tick for now because I've got no terrain to attach it to. You've got your angle. So say, for example, you wanted to put it on the flats only. You could put it on the flats only. If you leave it at 0, that will put it on flats as well as steep angles. If I wanted to align it to flats, I might want to stick it to, I don't know, an angle of, say, 10 degrees. That means you might get a little bit on the actual slope, but not much. You've got random yaw, which allows you to randomize the tree, and uniform scale. You can choose it so the tree is not fully uniformed. You can have it so it's a little bit skewed if you want. Scale min and max, I always like to play with this figure. I might set it to say 1 to say 2.5. This will change depending on the size of your tree. Then you've got your offset min and max. That will allow you to offset the tree. Your random pitch, I'm not going to worry about a random pitch. Your ground slope, I'll set that to say 10 as well. And then you've got your height, min and max, and your landscape layout. I don't have a landscape on here, so I won't be able to worry about that. Now, with that selected, this first icon is actual paint. So if you have a look, what you've also got is your brush size and your paint density. The brush size, if I can, what I'll do is I'll just move that to one side. I'll zoom out, and you can see the brush size here. That's set at 231.35. If I enlarge it, you can see that brush size getting larger and smaller. Paint density, well, as it says, it's the density of the painting. I can either leave it at 1, which is going to be quite thick, even though I've set the density to 10, or you can bring it down. Now, I'm going to set it for halfway for now. I'll go into erase density a little later. Now, to paint, all you do is you hold down the Control key and click. And the first click usually takes a while, but as you can see, as I'm clicking and dragging, I'm getting trees. And you've also noticed that I'm also getting a variety of different sizes, because that's what I've set the scale min and max to. So if I set the paint density up to 1, and if I hold down the Control key and click, that is starting to paint in other areas as I drag it around. So for example, I want the density to be higher. I'll set that to say 50. And if I click, I'll get more trees. What it does is if you see it not painting in certain areas, it's because it's already taking what's already been painted and putting that into the equation. So if you see it's not painting, don't panic. Just keep dragging and it'll eventually paint. If you want more, of course, just beef up the density and beef up the paint density here as well. So as you can see, I have now got a whole stack of these paintable trees. And as I said, this also works for other assets. So say, for example, I decide I want to put some rocks in here. Now, I'm not sure if there are rocks, but let's have a look. Here we go. Let's stick on this rock. I know this rock mesa is huge, but this one should be a little bit smaller. So if I click and drag that in, you can see we've now got the 2. Now, if I don't want to paint any more of these trees, all I do is I click on it, and that's gone. What will happen is it's still in the foliage painter, so you can paint more, but it means I won't be painting the trees and the rocks at the same time. So if I set the density, I'll set the size, and so forth, and if I now start painting, remember the first click always takes a little bit of time, don't panic, it's just putting it into memory. And as you can see, I now have got rocks. So that is one way you can actually add extra foliage, rocks, or whatever to your scene just to make it quicker. Say, for example, I've decided, I've got too many rocks. To erase, it's quite simple. Hold down the Control, Shift, and click. And it is erasing. You can also set the erasure density up here if you don't want to do all, or if you want to do just some. So as you can see, it's not erasing a lot, because I've set it, but it's erasing the odd few, as you can see, disappearing there. So that's how you can easily add more foliage, grass, rocks, any sort of static mesh to your scene. But keep in mind, you don't want anything too high poly, otherwise it will kill the scene. Okay, so to go back to just normal mode, you just click on the cross, and you're now back in normal mode. So the next thing we want to do is we want to bring in some more meshes, and I'll show you another way of actually resizing them and rotating them, etc. So for example, I take this rock mesa. I'll just drag this in. As you can see, it's quite large. If I wanted to manually place this instead of using the foliage editor, it's quite simple. With this placed, all I do is hold down the Alt key, and if I drag on one of these axes, it's creating an instance, it's creating a copy. So I've got that, I can rotate it around, I can place it manually. Resize it however I want. Now there's another way of also resizing apart from these little arrows here. Come down to the bottom and you have got draw scale. This allows you to punch in a figure. So if I punch in 5, it's kind of quite huge, as you can see. A little bit too huge. So if I bring this back down to 1, and that's brought it back down to a different size. You can also do it non-uniformly. As you can see, I can stretch that up if I wanted to. Now, these are the little buttons here. So you've got your uniform scale, your non-uniform scale, which is your X, Y, and Z. And you've also got these other little extra buttons here. This one here, if I was to select it, this is your Enable Drag Grid Snap. This is something that you will use a lot when you are actually designing architecture, for example. You might have a wall and you need your walls to snap. Now, the UDK grid sizes are from 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, and so forth. At the moment, it's set at 16. If I wanted to get a closer grid snap, I'd bring it back down. If I wanted a larger grid snap, I'd bring it up. Now to view this, if I go into one of the other modes, you have a look at the density of the actual mesh here. At the moment it's set to 2. If I set it to 64, set it to 8, the density of the mesh is getting larger or bigger depending on what you've actually set it to. And you will use this a lot when you are aligning stuff, which I'll go into a little bit later. The other option here is your rotation. You've got your angle of degrees, so you can rotate it a certain way. So if I wanted to set it to say 45 degrees, and I select this rock, it'll snap, as you can see, to 45 degrees. You can see that snapping. And you've also got your grid scale snap, which is your when you're scaling up your texture or you're scaling up your mesh, that will snap to a certain grid scale. And of course, this here is your save button. So that is how you can actually have it so it snaps together, and so you can change the rotate settings and so forth. Okay, to now create your own package, we've seen how we can actually access other packages, but to make your own package, very easy. several ways of doing this. Now, what I like to do myself is I like to go to my main directory, my main package, and I can click on New. Now, what this will do is this will create a new package, and I can call it whatever I want. Now, I don't want to put it in my Shares map one because that is for my map only. So, say for example, I want to call my package Evoker Assets. We give it a name. Now here the grouping, what this does is this allows you to itemize your things. For example, I personally like to have a group called Material, a group for instances, a group for static meshes, a group for particles, and so forth. This allows you to quickly view all your different assets a much quicker way. So in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to create just a standard quick material. So what I like to do is I like to call a grouping called Material. Again, you don't have to use this, but it's a neat and tidy thing. Now, when I create materials, I always like to give it a prefix of mat for material. So what I'm doing here is putting mat underscore, and I'll give it a name. That'll do. Give it whatever name you want, but whatever you do, never put spaces. Now, there's all types of factories that you can create a material from. You can create an asset from anything. What I want is a material, so I click on Material and click OK. Now, what this will do, this will open up the material editor. If I just move this to the side, you'll also see that it's created a material under a new name called Evoker Assets, under the group called Material. Anything that's a new package will automatically put it in here. Whatever you do, you always want to save, save, save. If you notice that a package has got this little asterisk, it means save. So to do that, all you do is you can right click on it and click on Save. Now, because this is also a brand new package, it's going to ask, where do you want to save this to? This is where you need to save it inside your own folder. So I'm going to save this under here, and I'm just going to save this under Objects for now. You can create a new folder called Materials, or you can save it in any other of the options that you've done. So once I choose where I'm saving it, click on Save. Now this has put it up underneath my Shares Evoker, Objects, Evoker Assets. Now you've also noticed that it's opened up the material editor. There is a lot you can do in the material editor. So all we're going to do is, I won't get into it too depth now, I'll just get you to create a simple material. All we're going to do is we're creating a material with a color on it. Now to create this, you can either do a search through here. For example, we want a constant, which will allow you to give it color. But we want a constant 3 for your RGBs. So if I type in the word constant, you've got your different constants here. The other way of doing it, by the shortcut keys, if you type the 3 and click inside here, it brings up this little button here. What I can then do is add it to my diffuse. Now you're probably thinking, oh, but it's still black. That's because, of course, the color's black. So if I was to give a 1 here, it'll go red. So that's red, green, and blue. Now, if you want to be able to see the actual material and go, oh, but hang on a minute, I want to choose the color myself, quite simple. All you can do, convert to parameter. So if you right click and convert to parameter, and if you click on this little button here, it brings up the color wheel. So you can choose whatever color you want. I click OK, and I click OK. Always hit the tick, and we have created our first material. Again, we want to save that because we've got little asterisks here. So right click and save. Now I want to add this to this box here. Easiest way of doing it, you can either click and drag, or with that selected, with the box selected, hover over the box, right click, and choose Materials, Assign from Content Browser. And there's my material on my box. From there, I can go in and I can change the color if I want. So if I reopen up the content browser, double click to open up the material editor, come into here, change the color, remember the ticket, and if we close this, it's now blue. So that's how you can easily create your own package and a stock standard material. Okay, the next thing you want to do is you want to be able to bring in your own textures. So there's simple ways of doing this. Now, one way is just by going to the internet and looking for textures. I'm actually a member of CG Textures and I do recommend them. They are a free site. You can also subscribe to them to get larger images. But please join up. This is the site here, cgtextures.com. It has a large array of all sorts of textures that you can use. Say, for example, I decide, okay, I would like to put on some grass on my ground. You can select the different options from here, or you can cheat and just type in the word grass and enter. And it brings up a whole range of different textures with grass. Some that I don't think is exactly grass, but never mind. So I want to come in and go, right, let's just pick a grass. As you scroll, you have got loads to choose from. 11 pages to be exact. So feel free to come in and have a play with them. I'm just going to pick one at random. This one looks alright because it's a little bit different. So all you do is you click on it. Now you want to try and get the tiled ones, that's fine. You don't necessarily need a huge texture because you've got to think of memory. All I'm going to do is I'm going to pick the small one and I'm going to resize that to 512. We always have to make sure that textures are a power of 2 before taking them into the engine. So I'm going to select this. The reason I'm also selecting it is because it's pre-tiled and I don't have to do any work with it. So I'm going to select 700 by 700 and it will bring up a box to save, and I'm going to hit OK and download that file. Okay, once you've downloaded that texture, open up Photoshop and resize that. Now I'm going to resize it to 512 by 512. To do that, all I do is go to image size and type in 512. If 512 doesn't come up for both, just make sure constrained proportions is on. Click OK. Now, whenever you are saving anything, any textures that go into the engine, you must save them as a target file format. So from here, I'm going to go File, Save As. I'm going to save them into my directory. I've created a new one called Textures. And I'll call this 001 Grass Diff. You don't have to adopt this format, but I do for a particular reason. Diff stands for diffuse, NRM stands for normal, SPEC stands for spec, and HM stands for height map. So I want to change this from a JPEG to a target file format and click on Save. Now we don't worry about any of this. Leave this as 24 bits. I will go into the 32 bits a little bit later. So click OK. And you can now close Photoshop. Okay. Okay, now to import your texture, very simple. Go back into the UDK and open up the content browser. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to import it into my Evoker Assets folder here. So to do that, all you do is you hit on Import. And this will take you to your content directory. Now, if you go to where you've actually saved your assets, now I've saved mine under Shares Evoker and under Textures. Now, what I did earlier is I've created a normal map to go with the diffuse map. To grab these assets, these will be available for you to download online. So, first of all, download those two textures. Now what I'll do is I'll import the diffuse first. So because I created with a diff, I know that's my diffuse map. So if I select it and click open, and we come to the import options here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it in my Evoker Assets package, if you've got another package you'd like to save it to, you can just click on the drop down arrow and choose the package you want. Or if you wanted to create a whole new package, you can do so. This is where the grouping I was telling you about earlier comes into it. I'm going to call this textures. So any of my textures go into that group. I'm going to leave my name. If it ever errors when you're trying to bring it in, it could be because you've got a space after the name. Try not to have any spaces after the name or even in between the name. Now what we're worried about here is we've got a whole stack of different options, and this does change depending on what you're importing. What I'm worried about with here is my compression no alpha. I want to tick that as I have no alpha map in that texture. And I want to leave the compression settings as TC default for my diffuse. Once I've done all that, I click on OK. And depending on how large the texture is, it might be quick, as this was, or it could take a while. So as you can see, this has now been brought in. And yet again, I'm going to right click on my package and save to save that package. Now if you have a look here under my Evoker assets, we have got material and textures. This is where it makes it easier. I can click on material, see any materials I've got, click on textures, see the textures I've got. Now the second thing that we want to import is what's called the normal map. This makes your textures look 3D, even though they're not. So to import the normal map, do the same old, click on import. And this time, this is why I give it the prefix. The NRM stands for normal. So I select that and open. And this is where it's a few things a little bit different. Now my grouping is textures because I'd already imported it from the textures being open. If you wanted to put in a different group, you just click on this here and it shows up the different groups. If you don't have a group there, you just type in the name. I want to leave the name of the file name. Now I know this doesn't have any alpha, so compression no alpha. And this time I want to choose TC normal map. So select that and click OK. And that brings in my normal map. And again, right click and save. So with this, what I want to do is I would like to create this time a whole new material with this grass texture. So what I'll do, just make this smaller. What I want to do is put it on the ground here. Okay, so we've got the blue box here, which we created the other material from. This time we're going to put grass on the box here. So to do that, because I want to save it in my materials group, come to my materials group, right click anywhere on this area here, and select new material. So left click new material. Again, it'll bring up the new box. Because I want to save it in my Evoker Assets material, I can leave this as is. And I'm going to call this mat_grass. And click on OK. And again, this will open up your material editor. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make this a little bit smaller and make this a little bit smaller as well. Because what I need to do is I need to be able to see my content browser as well as my material editor. So with this open, I'll just scale that down. What I want to do is I want to bring in my texture. So if we go to the textures and we select the grass, again, click on what we do to bring it in is you click on the grass, come over to here, and with the T key selected, press down T and left click. That'll bring the texture in. If you wanted to do it the other way, which I'll show you for the normal map, is come up to here, type in texture, and what we want is a texture sample. Click and drag this in, and there's your texture sample. Now the reason why it's already brought up my normal map is because that was already selected. If I had nothing selected and I drag the texture sample in, it's black because there's no texture. So if I wanted to add a texture after the fact, come down to the bottom where it's got texture none, and I can select whichever texture I want, click on the green arrow, and it pops it in there as well. So as you can see, there are different ways of bringing in the texture. Holding down T and clicking, coming over here, typing in texture, click and drag with it selected, or if you click and drag with nothing selected, drag it in, select the texture, and add it into the texture sample. So what we want to do now is we want to put these in. So we click and drag the black little arrow here and select it onto diffuse And as you can see, this changes to grass. And we want this to be our normal map. As you can see, it made a change and it looks a little bit more bumpier. Now you can change this from a sphere to anything else. Across the top here, you can change it to a cylinder, to a square or a cube, and just to a flat plane. Now that is only being shown on one side because this is not a two-sided material. So if you hit plane and can't see it, just scroll your mouse around the same way you do it in the editor until you can actually see the actual plane. I'll just put it back to a cube. Okay, that's simple as that to create a material with a grass texture. So if I click on the arrow to apply the changes, and what I want to do now is I want to apply this to the ground here. So if I come into material, now you notice that at first that was just the standard default textures that you get with when you open up the UDK. As soon as I hovered over it, you notice the grass popped in. So what I want to do is I want to add this material to the ground here. So I can click and drag, or I can right click and I can add material. And there you go. Now you're probably looking at it going, ew, yucky, the grass looks terrible. That's because we haven't actually put a UV scaler into the actual texture. It is scaling the texture 1-to-1 over this entire box. So we want to make this a little bit better. So to do that, go back into your content browser and we'll save. Don't forget to save. Double click on your material. And now what we're going to do is add the UV scaler. Now you want the UV scalars to be the same for your normal map as well as your diffuse, otherwise it'll look quite silly. Now to also move around in here, you probably notice if I hold this, I'm moving just this. All I'm doing is I'm selecting this, holding down the control key, left click and drag. If I want to select these two together, I can hold down the control and click and it selects them both. Or control alt and drag, see this little red box? That'll drag around. That also allows you to select. So what I want to do, because I like things to be nice and tidy, I want to bring in a UV coordinate texture. You can again come in here, type in UV, and we have got, I make this bigger, all these different options. But what I want to do is I want to type in a texture sample UV coordinate. So to do that, all I can do here is somewhere in this area, hold down the U and click. And here's your texture coordinate. What I then want to do is I want to put these into the back of both the diffuse and the normal. Now you'll notice nothing's changed yet. That's because the texture coordinate is just set to 1-to-1. What I can do here is I can set it to say, I'm going to go here 20 and 20, and it scaled it. And if I move this to the side, and once I hit the tick, you'll notice this all change. And there we go. It's a lot better. Still not the best. So you can come back into your material and you can tweak this a little bit further. I might make it 80 and 80. And it's starting to look a little bit better. So that is how you can actually resize your texture scaling to make it look a little bit better on the actual terrain. You can also add more functionality to your material. You can have it so it doesn't look so tileable. You notice this has got a fairly constant tiling pattern. You can add more items to your actual material. Materials can become quite large. Now, one thing that you must take note when you are creating materials, especially for landscape, is your texture samples. You are only allowed X amount of texture samples. On a landscape, you're actually only allowed 12. This isn't a landscape, hence why you've got 15. But you are only allowed 12 on a landscape. It's always best once you get to 10 to do not make any more textures. Think about other ways of putting the actual texture on the ground, maybe using decals. The reason you need to leave 2 texture slots is for light maps. This also goes for static meshes. You must make sure you don't have full texture slots taken up. For example, in this case, I would not want 15 of 15. It will start erroring. So if you're creating a landscape and you're painting away your material and all of a sudden your component goes black, have a look at your texture samples and dial it back. Make sure you don't have any more than 10 because you need 2 for light maps. Also, this will tell you your instruction count. This is only very, very small. I've actually got my own textures or materials that are absolutely massive. So this is, you can actually build on it and make it look a little bit better. So what we have learnt in this lesson is how to create your own package, how to import static meshes into the scene, how to paint meshes onto the landscape so you've got more of a landscape, I guess, with more trees and rocks, how to scale size, how to instance them by selecting it, holding down the Alt key and dragging to making a duplicate of that static mesh, how to create a basic material, and how to import your textures.